welcome into the show. It is Daniel Workman coming to you live from the Dreamagine Sports Studios. It is 9 a.m. on the East Coast. This is your 6 a.m. super early morning wake-up call in all time zones in between and around the world. Thanks for tuning in each and every weekday. You can watch, as always, at danielworkman.com/watch to find all of the ways to see the show. Thanks for tuning in today. Yesterday, after the show aired, news broke from Grant Wahl. He said, breaking U.S. Soccer Chief Legal Officer Lydia Walke has resigned. Her decision comes after the completion of an outside law firm's review of the process of U.S. Soccer's now disowned legal strategy, arguing that women inherently had less skill, ability, and responsibility than men. That strategy led to condemnation and the resignation of President Carlos Cordero in March. According to the Federation, they announced that Walke will provide consulting services through September 15th, saying, quote, "We would like to thank Lydia for all her hard work and dedication during her time with U.S. Soccer." New U.S. Soccer President Cindy Parlow-Cone called the legal strategy, quote, offensive on March 16th and said, "We are going to do a comprehensive review of our internal process to better understand how this breakdown occurred and how it can be avoided in the future." Parlow-Cone, who headed the U.S. Soccer Board's Special Litigation Committee, said she had not seen the strategy before its public release, though strong indications of that strategy had appeared in previous public filings. U.S. Soccer says it is not in a position to discuss the details of the review or the conclusions reached by the outside law firm on the advice of its legal counsel in the pending lawsuit versus the U.S. women's national team players. A source with knowledge of the review said it concluded that Walke deserved at least some blame for what happened. No U.S. Soccer board members are expected to lose their positions following the review. Cindy Parlow-Cone said, quote, "It should be clear that while Carlos Cordero did not review or approve of the offensive language in the filing, by personally resigning, he decided to put the best interest of U.S. Soccer first." U.S. Soccer made a statement to Wahl saying, quote, "Moving forward, substantial legal filings of this nature will be required to be shared with the president, members of our board, and others within the Federation for review in a timely manner to ensure we do not encounter a similar situation where language inserted by outside counsel would be in contrast with the Federation's philosophy and beliefs." All of that is good and well. But Grant went on to say this, and I don't know if you remember, but when all of this news broke, I kept asking and others kept asking, what did they know and when did they know it? Not just Carlos Cordero, but every member of the board of directors. What did they know and when did they know it? We still do not have a clear answer on that, but Grant Wahl went on to say this. Source connected to U.S. Soccer says that Parlow-Cone was unaware of the offensive language in the March filing that went public and received condemnation from fans, sponsors, and players. But, and this is a big but here, she had been aware of the overall legal strategy based on the February 20th public filing. So, on one hand, she said, I had no idea, and I condemn these offensive statements. This is what she said publicly at the time. But we are now starting to get confirmation to what we suspected and what I had heard from others within U.S. Soccer for a while, which is she knew a lot more than she wanted anyone else to know. She was more aware of the legal strategy and tactics than she claimed when the news broke. You got to remember that Cindy Parlacone has been working within the Federation for a while. In the 2018 presidential election cycle, she was not a member of the Athlete Council, but she served as a sort of liaison to the Athlete Council for the candidates. And she was kind of a gatekeeper and, you know, would have interviews with the different candidates and was involved in the process. She was not out of the picture. Like she has been working within the Federation at some level, either the Athlete Council or other things, for a while. She's been around and involved. When you look at, you know, status quo and things that are part of status quo, she has been part of that apparatus for a while. Now, that is not to say that her being aware of the legal strategy means that she agreed with the legal strategy. I want to be clear about this. I am not suggesting that I have heard from any sources that she was in favor of the legal strategy that was being taken into consideration and put into action against the U.S. women's national team. I'm not saying that she was in favor. We don't know one way or the other yet on that aspect, and she has not made herself available to make public comments on answering that question. However, we do now know that her claim of not knowing about the legal strategy before all of this blew up is false. And that's a problem. That's an issue. That is something that is, to me, is disturbing. And it really goes to the heart of the issue for me, which is I think that the entire board of directors is due for turnover, that we need to see a new board of directors at U.S. Soccer. If nothing else, just turn the page. There's just been too many mishaps with this and other situations of recent, the way the DA was terminated and nothing in its wake and just chaos, etc. I think that we have reached a point where that is necessary. It is needed. And I think Carlos Cordero kind of falling on the sword and being the sacrificial lamb here is not enough. I think he did the right thing in resigning, but I think others should follow suit, not sit there and hold on to power for power's sake. Our sponsor this half hour is Ductic Brand, DUKTIG brand.com. You can learn more about them at ducticbrand.com. They are the makers of really, really cool products and apparel. If you hadn't picked up a shirt, you should do so today at ducticbrand.com, DUKTIG brand.com. Use promo code DWShow. You'll get 10% off of your order at ducticbrand.com. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the show. Thanks for tuning in this morning. We are joined by a friend of ours, a friend of the show, Sam Blackburn, originally from New Zealand. So if you hear this funny accent while he's talking, you'll know where he's coming. It's from the bottom end of the world, but it's now here in the U.S. and he's coaching. And welcome into the show, Sam. How are you?
Cheers, mate. No, I'm doing really well. Thanks for the intro. I even put on the fern for you just to represent even more.
There you go. So tell us, before we get into your background in the game and some of your experience growing up in New Zealand, what originally brought you to the States? How did you originally end up here in America?
So I guess that answer is linked to the game as well, because I grew up obviously playing soccer my whole life, and in New Zealand we only actually have the one professional team. It's a country of 5 million people, and soccer is a popular sport, but just the one professional team in the Wellington Phoenix. And so as a talented male player, you kind of set your eyes on that team, and if that falls through, a lot of boys look at the States as a kind of second option. So even before I came out, there's a bit of a history of Kiwis venturing out to take soccer scholarships, the likes of Ryan Nelson, Simon Elliott, Andy Boyens, like names that are familiar in the MLS. They started their careers as college soccer players. So basically, I was one of those talented players that wasn't quite at the professional level in New Zealand. And then so I made the decision to continue my playing career here and also get the degree. So I threw my name out. I contacted a lot of coaches. I had a lot of coaches contact a lot of coaches on my behalf. And the University of Mobile in Alabama was the one that came calling, and where I ended up. So 2009, I came out as a freshman. Finished my 4 years, and then went home again, where I got a job in the game. Moved back purely because during that first stint in the States, I met a girl. So she was the one that managed to pull me back. So now I'm back there. Yeah.
Yeah, so the girl, the women thing, that typically can do it for you, right?
Yeah, I guess the game was what took me here, but the girls what kept me here. So.
There you go. Well, growing up in New Zealand, and before you got to this, place of actually going off to college and what brought you to the States, growing up in New Zealand, what was the environment like as a youth player? What kind of, training and opportunities, what was that experience like for you? Because in a second, we'll get into what you've observed here in the States for youth players growing up. But what was it like for you there in New Zealand?
I guess the first thing that I'll say on that is that New Zealand is an incredibly passionate sporting nation. So we obviously have the All Blacks, the rugby team, which are our hallmark team, but sport is huge in New Zealand, not just rugby, but soccer, sports like cricket, netball, basketball, Olympic sports as well, really, really popular. And so most kids, I would say, are playing a variety of sports, either in a club or at school at an early age. And I was one of the ones that kind of, again, threw my head into everything. So I was playing cricket, I was running track, I was playing hockey for my school, I was playing ping pong, I was playing tennis. I kind of did it all, and soccer was kind of the one that I found myself excelling at, I guess, the most. But I was also a really good cricket player, and it wasn't until I was 14 where I actually made the choice. I was playing cricket in the summer and soccer in the winter. And it wasn't actually till I was in my second year of high school that I decided to stop playing cricket and play soccer full time. So I guess that's one of the things that we have as a bit of a strength in our country, is that the sporting experience is really varied, and there's a lot of opportunity to develop athleticism in a non kind of specialized way. And I guess I was one of those kids. When it did come time to commit fully to soccer, my pathway was, I was fortunate to get into kind of representative football really, really early. And then from there into men's football really, really early. So I was playing senior men's football in Wellington as a skinny little redhead when I was 15 years old. And I guess that's probably one of the biggest factors in my development, I'd say, is like venturing into senior football really quickly. From there, I was spotted by a couple of fantastic coaches that I had at the time, and they saw they saw some potential in me. And so I was playing in really, high performing National League senior teams by the time I was 16 as well. So yeah, I guess there's a broad kind of foundation in multi-sport, and then some really important coaches that I had, and then senior football was a really important piece as well.
So in terms of the playing opportunities for you as a player, even prior to 14, is that kind of integrated in with the school experience, or is this like separate clubs like what most kids are experiencing in America?
So at elementary school, primary school, as we call it back home, and intermediate school and middle school, as you guys call it here, there's not really any organized. Well, there's very, very little organized kind of sport in it, and so most of my development of those early years was done in a club environment. Again, just throughout the winter, pretty much. There were some opportunities in the summer to like attend, extra training and things like that, but for the most part, it was really cricket in the summer and soccer in the winter. And the soccer was pretty much largely with the club. It wasn't until about I was 11 or 12 that we got into representative football. So I was able to represent my region. I guess if we compared it to here, it would be representing Lower Alabama. So you would take all of the clubs out of Lower Alabama and find the best, select the best 11-year-olds, and they would compete against other parts of Alabama. And then from there, in the next couple of years, I represented my my federation, which was the Wellington Federation. So again, that would probably compare to like Alabama. You'd be representing the state. And then from there, that's kind of how it worked. And it was kind of a nice, smooth kind of pathway. You progress from club to region to federation to high performing team, just like that. Yeah.
In terms of the development and finding the right pathway for players, the U.S. Soccer Federation has taken the view that the best 12-year-olds, for example, are best suited to play with and against the best 12-year-olds, and that's the best thing for their development. So it doesn't really matter, like where you're at. Like you got to get in a club that may mean you're driving an hour, 2 hours just for training. And then, from there, you got to play with that group and travel around over the course of maybe 2, 3, 4 states to play other teams that are, the best 12-year-olds. And although that is one way to provide competition for some 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, et cetera, that are excelling in their local area. One of the things that you brought up, and I've seen this firsthand with my own kids, is this opportunity of playing with older players, playing in different environments. We've had guests on the show, some former women's national team players who've talked about as young girls playing with the boys and how much that shaped their development and their pathway as a player, and how it helped their ability to improve and learn skills and do things as a player that they probably wouldn't have had, or certainly to that level, if they would have just stayed with their age group, playing with other girls. So it's interesting that you bring that up, that your own development was at hitting it around 14, 15.
Yeah.
Now you start playing with the first team. These are grown men. These are adults. There's something to be said there that I think the Federation is missing in making this kind of generic, universal, not to say that you should never, do that. If you've got enough great 12-year-olds in an area of the country and travel's not crazy and it's not too expensive, fine. Yeah. But there's a lot of places in the country, most places in the country, the majority of the country, where that's just not a realistic thing to have local play and consolidate the best 12, 13, 14-year-olds or whatever into one team to be able to provide that kind of development pathway and what's best for them. And so I think we should look at, taking kids and who are, really good for their age, for their local context, and going, rather than, hey, driving an hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever to be a part of this other project, this other club, where we're going to try to bring in and recruit the best players from the, 5-hour radius or whatever. Let's have a conversation with the parents about having this 12-year-old play with the 13 or 14-year-olds, having, some of these girls that are excelling at their age group. Maybe they play up with a higher age girls team, or they play with the same age boys team, or taking a young boy who maybe physically isn't fully, hasn't hit puberty, isn't fully developed. So to take him at 12 and playing with 14-year-olds may not make sense. But what if he played with 13-year-old girls or 14-year-old girls? Would that level maybe work? And I know it's been a little taboo here in the States to not think that way, but I think there are other creative solutions to providing the right developmental environment for each player that we should be thinking out of the box to do. One of the things that I know as coaches we run into, especially a coach like you, I have this as well, in dealing with a pool of players. You've got a whole wide range of a spectrum. Players who are further along in their developmental pathway and cycle than some other players. What have been some challenges as you've engaged in that in your coaching? What has been some challenges for you as a coach to be able to help those that are not as far along, progress and improving it better, while at the same time challenging those who are maybe the better players in that age group and in that pool to continue to get better?
It's a great question. Back home we have the coach education pathway has a course called the Junior Level 1, and it's a course which I has delivered. I was one of the ones that actually got to deliver it for a few years, aimed at kind of mums and dads, recreational beginner coaches. Big part in of that course is a few slides on what we call dealing with difference. So that's obviously a challenge which is not just restricted to the US. It's a challenge I'm sure coaches around the world face. But in that kind of course, we talk about those kids that are striving to keep up, and the ones that are forging ahead, and then the ones in the middle that are kind of coping, so they're coping fine. And the way in which I was kind of taught to manage that was to try and, firstly, and this is what I've tried to do since I've been here, and I've been in had that a pool team and other teams with varied ability. First, got to kind of put a lot of time and a lot of effort into your planning to ensure that whatever kind of session topic or theme that you're talking about is going to be appropriate for all the kids and not just some of the kids. And I think more often than not, I'll pitch and I'll design the session a little lower then maybe I'll design the session a little lower than what I would for if I had a whole group of kids that are just coping. And I feel like that helps me because it will simplify the message for all of them, and then I can spend the remainder of the time kind of challenging the ones that are forging ahead, if you get where I'm going. So I think design and planning is the key for something like that. And then pitching the session relatively low, and then using your ability as a coach to really push the ones that need it from within a kind of simplified session design. Does that make sense, kind of?
Yeah, it does. One of the things I've experienced with this and have tried to implement is I will typically use a lot of different variables in running the same session. So whether that's let's say there's a group of players that are not as far along as another group of players. So maybe we're doing a passing session or a rondo session. So instead of asking them to complete, 10 passes, I'm asking them to complete 5 passes. Where they're still feeling a level of success. We're still asking them to compete and work and play and enjoy their training, but we're not putting so high demands on them that they just get frustrated and they're like, I can't do this, I can't keep up, and want to just quit. And then on the other side, those who maybe can handle it, we change those numbers around. So maybe instead of the 5, we're looking at 10 or 15. I know that there's times where I'll have one group that's working on a playing out from the back type of rondo session where I'm asking them to complete a certain number of passes on one side of the field so that they get an understanding of positioning to support the ball. And I feel like they can connect a higher number before they go to make a switch to the other side of the field. And when the lower group comes in, they're not asked to do that as high of a level. So I think there's some ways that you can take a session like you mentioned. Hey, we're going to work on these fundamental aspects of the game, whatever they are, and use that and use some variables to challenge appropriately at each kind of level of the spectrum, whether you're the A group, the B group, or what I call the AB group, which you were talking about, the coping group, that kind of group in the middle.
Yeah. The biggest takeaway that we try to get coaches on that junior level 1 course was to not be afraid of giving a different challenge within the same session, within the same plan. Don't be afraid to give a different challenge to different players. So like you mentioned, it might be as simple as a rondo, and you might just say, move the ball around the rondo however you want. But for those kids that are forging ahead, you might just walk around and, whisper in the ear, hey, can you try and play one touch when possible? You might not give that challenge to every single player, but as long as you start with something simple, then I feel like more comfortable using individual interventions or individual challenges to push those ones ahead without leaving the other ones behind by pitching the session too high, if you get what I mean.
Absolutely. And I think that's where a lot of the coaching education in America has really kind of missed something. And that is the art of coaching, like man management, having the ability to get all of your players excited to play, excited to train, eager to even work on their own, to do different things like that. It's easy to sit there with a whiteboard or a Ductic brand notebook and sketch out a session and go, hey, here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to run. Blah, 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 X's and O's, yada, 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 tactics for days, technical skills for days. But there's an art form to like how you manage players, whether it's that one-to-one interaction, whether it's taking a group of 4, 5, or 6 players and teaching them and putting into a training session certain scenarios that shape them that they can handle versus some other players, and it's not always black and white. I mean, I can see at times when I've run sessions where maybe it's the topic that we're working on that night or something that we're emphasizing. There's some players, for example, I'll use like their weaker foot, for example. There's some players that are more comfortable to use both feet, and there's some players that aren't as comfortable. And so, even in that setup, that doesn't always translate to the person that's comfortable with both feet is the best player. They may be somewhere in the middle, but it's still having to work through the nuance of that in that session and kind of being able to identify. So I think observations, communications, and not being so rigid in like this player is identified as this, whether that's, the bottom end of the spectrum, middle, or the top. It's having an open mind and letting the players in how they train on their own and how they train in training sessions really be the ones that kind of provide their own evaluations of who they are, where they are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think even before that, and I think this is something that our club does really well, is to have a culture and for every coach to have an individual mindset that you have a duty of care to every single player in your care, and each and every one of those little people deserve coaching, So like I was saying before, it would be very easy for me to take a very group and pitch a high, an advanced session for them that I know the ones that are forging ahead will be able to do and we'll help push them on. But in doing so, I'm likely to leave others behind. I might even lose some kids to the game if I do that consistently. So I always try and remember that, like, these are children and they all deserve my attention and my coaching. And you know what? At the end of the day, the effect that we will have on those top ones, I don't even know if I could put a percentage on what it would be, but in a lot of ways, those kids are going to make it anyway, and it's actually a large degree of success for a youth coach should come from keeping those ones that are striving to keep up in the game long term. There's another thing that I feel like as a strength of football in New Zealand is that the national body and the federations underneath that national body put a lot of time and love and care into the rec player. They understand that the high performance football landscape really only makes up 2% of total footballers, and so the 98%, which actually puts money in the coffers of New Zealand football and the federations, is the ones that deserve as much attention and effort from their leaders as they can get. You know what I mean?
So what does that look like for New Zealand football? Like, how do they show that love and care and attention to the community soccer player, the non in American soccer we've got a label for everything, elite, premier, I just make fun of all the labels all the time, but these players are not in the elite, premier, super duper travel, premium, whatever, club, league, etc. That these are your community based rec type player. So how does New Zealand, approach that group and provide that care and attention?
Can I do a screen share? I've got something up here that I was looking at earlier that might be able to explain a little bit better than me. But this is can you see that?
Yep.
So this here is actually a picture of the National Player Development Framework, and so within it you can kind of see where rec and everything kind of fits. And down the bottom there you have your phases of play, much like the English FA. But as you can see, everyone's important, and all these white lines kind of signify how every single part of the landscape is linked. It's a full framework. Rec isn't separate from community football, and community football isn't separate from talent football. My job that I had when I was back home as a development officer was actually largely in this space. I was working to try and bridge the gap between the rec and the community participation and push it into the talent perform kind of space. So this is kind of a fundamental framework that the national body uses, and it filters down pretty well into the federations as well. So
what would be some of the things that would be done by the federation and in the national association, but even in the local federations to really provide resources or instruction, whatever, to that level of play to try to focus attention on that lowest level of the player pyramid and pathway?
Okay, I guess the first thing that sticks out with that question is that, and this is in comparison to the US, is that everyone in this green space here, well, 1, 2, and 3, they all pay the same amount to participate in football throughout a season. Unless you want extra kind of the skill center here, they might cost a little bit extra for the kind of kids that are after a little bit more. But everyone in this space here pays the same amount for football, and in comparison to the USA, is very, very cheap. Like we're talking $200 for a 20-week season, and that includes the cost of your shirt and your shorts. So I guess that's one of the first and most powerful things that support this kind of framework, is that it's accessible to everybody. And then I guess the next thing would be that in order, these players are all made up from these players here, and no one ever forgets that. You can't have talented players without community players. They all come from the same. They all come from number one. So New Zealand football and the federations try and put a lot of love and a lot of effort into this part of the game, more so than we really do into this part of the game up here.
So in terms of, like, let's say coaching resources, coaching education, things that are generally, handled with a lot of volunteers, a lot of, masses of people, right? Your lowest cost, kind of highest participation rates. You mentioned the 98% of the country was kind of more in that level of the pyramid. So
here,
what were kind of some of the resources available, coaching education available to those clubs and teams and coaches?
Yeah, so my job actually was one of those resources. I was lucky, like I said, as soon as I graduated from the University of Mobile, I went back to New Zealand and I managed to get a job I was a football development officer. That was my name. That was my title. And there were about 25 of us, I would say, spread out around the country. And we were funded by a combination of New Zealand football and Sport New Zealand, which is the federal government, the national government. Our salaries were paid in combination of those two entities. And our job, like I said, was pretty much on this left-hand side of the framework. We were put to work to develop and grow and improve the quality of football purely on this side here. We every now and again we would coach the odd talented player, but 90% of our work was done on this side here. So we were the ones that would go around the clubs and conduct coaching courses for mums and dads. We would be the ones that would run holiday programs, camps and things like that, in communities which couldn't run them themselves. Again, our job was here because we realized that this is actually where the talent is made, and in all honesty, we had enough knowledge and enough experience and enough resources to kind of accommodate for this side anyway. And even when we were putting all of our money and time and resources into this side, we weren't actually doing very well anyway. We weren't qualifying for World Cups. We weren't qualifying for Olympic Games. We weren't even playing a very nice brand of football. So New Zealand football and like I said, Sport New Zealand made this decision. I think the Football Development Officer program started in probably like 2010, 2011, when all of this was put into place. And so the country put all of their time, money, and resources into here. And I'm biased because I was one of them, but I feel like it's had a really positive effect on football development and the quality of football in New Zealand. Our under-20s just had their highest, their best finish in an under-20 World Cup ever. We had a boy from that team signed for Bayern Munich. We've had a bunch of others signed for professional clubs. And I just think that it's a result of putting time and money into, and experience and knowledge into grassroots, into community football. So
in looking at that, for the American system that you're coaching in currently, what would that translate to? Like, how would you take a program where you were an FDO, football development officer? What would that look like here in America compared to what we experience on a daily basis?
I guess what I would start with, especially here in Alabama, is another part of the role of the football development officer was in club development. So we would go in and support clubs in developing their vision and philosophies and designing 5-year plans for the clubs and really basic stuff like developing role descriptions for staff members and things like that. Developing products such as after school programs or holiday programs and things like that too. So I think that's one area where there's a bit of an opportunity for US soccer is in club development. And I don't know how much the technical directors of each state or US soccer as a national body actually do to help grow these community clubs. I know there's a lot of talk and a lot of effort put into the high performance space, and there should be, but like I said before, I don't think that there is a high performance space without a community and a community space. So that's where all the time and the resource should really start. That's where the most of it should be going if you really want a solid foundation for your football landscape.
So looking at the American system, the system you're coaching in at the moment, what do you think are some key things that clubs around the country could do or should be doing, or at least thinking about doing to be better at being a club? You mentioned the 5-year plan. You mentioned, some of the strategic things that you guys would do in terms of, defining roles, et cetera. What are some of those things that if you were to wear your football development officer hat for just a minute and let's just drop you in a club somewhere, in the US and say, hey, take a look. What do you think? What are some things that you would be looking for that would help, a club that's trying to figure out how do we get better at being a club?
Well, I guess the first thing, and I'm kind of harping on a bit about it right now, but is to support the rec programs a little bit more. I think that there's a divide. There's a little bit of a us versus them kind of approach sometimes to rec soccer in a lot of clubs that I've seen. And so I would like to see more clubs kind of bring them in a little bit more and understand that there's actually no real way to tell what a talented player looks like when they're 9 or 10 anyway. So increasing the pool at that grassroots level, I think, is really, really important. And then as well, I think just really defining. I think clubs can define their mission a little bit more in their vision, and I think that um, incorporating some elements of the community into that is an important piece. And another thing that I'm kind of proud of with our club that we work in at the moment is we kind of see that we wouldn't be where we are without our communities, and they are the foundation to our club. And so I think that's an opportunity for a lot of clubs. And again, just reiterating what I said, maybe actually having a look at what percentage of your club really is high performance, really, how much is it really, and how much resource and time are you dedicating to, your ratios, your percentages. Are you putting 80% of your time and effort into the 10% when really it should be a little bit the other way? I think that can be something that clubs can look at as well.
In terms of what you guys had in New Zealand, that these clubs that had kind of the rec level and maybe what you're talking like the talent or high performance level or whatever. What was the setups of those clubs? Were the clubs playing like in-house leagues? Were they traveling and playing other local clubs? What was the landscape there for a club in New Zealand versus a typical kind of what I've generally seen as a definition or demarcating line for soccer clubs at youth soccer in America is basically like if we play in an in-house league, we're considered rec. If we're playing in a travel club, then that means that we get to travel around to other towns or other local clubs and play against each other. I'm curious, what was the experience like in New Zealand with that rec level program with the club? Is it something that was still playing in house, or is it something that was playing around the area?
This is another thing which I'm still trying to get my head around in the USA is the game structure and the lack of a organized league season, even with the kids. In New Zealand, you have a youth club, and all of the ages are still separated by ability. You have your rec players, and they might play for a C team, and then you'll have your stronger players. Let's take a ninth grade, for example, under 10s. You'll have a ninth grade A, you might have a ninth grade B, depending on the size of your club. You might have a ninth grade C. All of those teams will play at the same amount of games, and they're all over, you play all over the region, but the region I'm from, Wellington's not a very big region. You wouldn't have to drive more than an hour to play your games. And this is probably the biggest strength that I think New Zealand has in comparison to the US, is that all of these games are organized and scheduled by the federation. So you, as a club, you'll let the federation know at the start of the season how many teams you have in each age group. You'll say, we have 3 ninth grade teams this year. They'll say, okay, we have across the region, we have, 30 ninth grade teams, all at varied levels. And they'll put it into a computer and go, boom, bang, bang, bang. There's a 20-game season for each of your 3 levels, home and away, 10 games in each, or whatever it is. And so it seems to me, I used to work with the people that would do it, competitions administrators, and it seemed like a lot of it was a few clicks of the button, but and all of a sudden you would have complete seasons for every single kid in the region. So I still don't really understand why that's not possible here. I understand that New Zealand was unique in the fact that we're a smaller country and we actually have quite a large number of soccer clubs per capita. So there's plenty of competition available, but I think that that's something that needs to be looked at here as well, is finding regular scheduled seasons for these players rather than just asking clubs to enter tournaments or find, pick up games however they can. I'd like to see someone take a little bit more responsibility for the game schedules of the kids' teams here.
Yeah, I agree. I think in the absence of guidance and direction and proper systems and structures, we've allowed for these kind of crazy three-eyed monsters in American youth soccer, whether it's all of the tournaments or what I consider to be like extremely excessive travel. And rather than keeping the main thing, which is allowing the kids to play, get out and play. And again, it was, we talked about earlier in this interview, if you find a kid or a few kids that are just, far and away above a level that is available to them at their own age group, there are things you can do for those players. There are some things that you can do. It doesn't not have to mean that the kid's got to get in the car and drive 4 hours to go start playing games. There's other ways to go about it. My oldest son has been playing with this group of adult Latinos every weekend until the pandemic hit. Since he was 10. And, the age ranges out there are pretty drastic. I mean, 10, 15, 20, 30 year, age gaps out there. But it's been incredible for him in development and his understanding of the game, his playing of the game. And he's played up within the club for many years. And I just view all those things as helpful to his development, where, the other option would have been, hey, I've got to find, if I just was married to the idea that I've got to keep him with the same 13-year-olds, the same 14-year-olds, whatever, then I would have had to pack him up and drive him 4 hours away or 6 hours away or whatever, till I found a place that had enough of that age group that were, around the same level for him to train with and then travel around and play games with. So, I think that we could do things smarter. And I love the slide that you shared about, your work in New Zealand, because I do think there's a lot of opportunities for solutions in American soccer. Yeah. And I think there are people that are trying to listen. They're trying to learn. They're trying to do the right things. We're just not quite there yet in terms of executing on those decisions or those ideas. I still think there's a lot of them that we for whatever reason, we've just not fully grasped, the potential of substantive, positive, structural change. And one of the ones that you just mentioned, I think is a key point, is, localize as much as possible the travel of these youth players. Find ways to challenge, if it's pool training, if it's a kid that's excelling, bump him up. If he's 9 years old and he's just crushing all the 9-year-olds, let him play with the 10-year-olds. Or like I said, there's things that you can do to kind of help that along. I just think we got to be a little bit more creative there.
We had a system in our the Capital Football Federation that I work for around kids playing up, so it was allowed. But again, we were part of our job as a development officer was to monitor those kids that were, those clubs that were wanting kids to play up. So, and in order for them to do it, because we had complete control of the leagues and the games that they were playing, we would ask them they would have to fill out what was known as a dispensation form. So a 12-year-old, the club would write, we would like dispensation for this 12-year-old to play in the 14th grade. And they would all come across our desks, and on a case-by-case basis, we would sign off on those, or we would reject those. So I think I don't want this to come off as a slight on any particular like entity or organization. But I think if the States and US soccer are truly in the business of player development, then they need to take a really hard look at how they are controlling the function of matches, of games. That's me is step number one. Like at the moment, the clubs, you can do whatever you want. You can play against whoever you want. Kids can play when, you know, in whatever age they want. There's no one really monitoring it at all. You can enter a tournament on a Wednesday and then enter another tournament on a Saturday if you want throughout the summer. There seems to be no real quality control at the community grassroots level around the organization and structure of matches, of games, and of seasons. So I think that needs to kind of come before any coaching courses or anything like that. I'd like to see people take a little bit more responsibility for that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I do think that's a major area where the Federation, with the recent announcement of the termination of the Development Academy, my argument was it didn't go far enough. It wasn't.
Again, to me, it seems like they have it fine on that end. But again, that's what 2% of the players. It's not even
2%. I mean, it was less than 1% of the players that were a part of that program, and yet, there's all this, stink and hullabaloo about the program and the termination of the program, and it was just keep going. Like you start it, but the scale of the project needs to continue to go all the way down. Not just for the 1/10 of 1% of the player. Finish the job and take it all the way out to the 100% of the players.
Yeah, I mean, to me, and again, this is from my experience back home as well. There are always going to be people who put time and effort and money into the talented kids. If you really want to grow the game and increase the base, like the average quality of the player, put the money and the time and the resource into the biggest percentage of players, and that's the community and the rec players, in my opinion. And I think it starts there, and I think then the next step has to be making sure that you're putting quality control measures around how many, getting them games and regular games, and making sure that they're the right games. And then we can talk about things like, moving players up and down depending on their individual needs. Yeah. I see so much about this DA stuff, and it's great, but again, I think it'll always be well looked after. Who's looking after the rest,
Yep, that's a great point, and great place for us to end today is looking at the whole, not just the few, which seems to be unfortunately running theme with soccer. The few at the expense of the many, and we need to get it the other way around. And
pretend that we have it all together either, but by the way, I think we're outside the top 100 in the FIFA rankings at the moment. So the women are doing good.
Yeah. So look, there's always challenges, and you guys are like the size of the city of Atlanta for the entire country. So there's always challenges everybody's got to deal with. Our problem is we got so many people in such a big country that it just seems like we haven't had enough leadership to really fully wrap our arms around what needs to happen.
Yeah, that's something that I appreciate as well. Things are a lot easier back home when you have a little bit of a smaller population and a little bit less geography. But then it's not impossible here, and I think there are enough people that care and are passionate about the sport and about the kids that we can get it done.
Yep, I agree. Well, Sam, thanks for coming on the show. We appreciate it. Look forward to having you back on again soon, and hopefully sooner rather than later, this pandemic, dies down and kids and coaches and parents can get back to the sport that we love on the field, and not just waiting and hoping and Zoom training and Zoom calls and so on and so forth, that we can get actually back to the sport we love on the field. So thanks for coming on the show. We appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Dan.
All right, my man. See ya.
Bye.
no one, no man, no woman, no child should ever have to drink green water with bugs, with algae, with disease in it. Bad water, lack of toilets, kills more people than all the wars in the world. We know how to bring clean drinking water right now to every single person on earth. And when you can bring water into communities, it truly transforms them. It changes everything. Or you could know that you'd made a difference. You could know that you had truly impacted the life of a family, of a community, of a region. There was either clean water or there wasn't. We believe in a world where every single person has clean and safe water to drink, and we will continue fighting until that happens.
Thanks for watching the show and watching it all week long. We appreciate it. Each and every weekday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can watch at danielworkman.com/watch. Hope you have a great weekend. We look forward to seeing everyone again on Monday. Goodbye.